Hello, everyone. I'm Crystal, and welcome to my visual podcast. And today we are going to discuss Egypt's well-respected leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Gamal Abdel Nasser's rise to power specifically. Now let's begin, shall we? So I have 8 artifacts that I'd like to present to all of you today, along with his background. Okay, so for his background, Gamal Abdel Nasser was born on January 15th, 1918, in Alexandria, Egypt. He died on September 28, 1970, at the age of 52 due to a heart attack. He was the Prime Minister of Egypt from 1954 to 1956, and he was the President of Egypt from 1956 to 1970. So when he was a kid, he lived in a mud brick house on an unpaved street in the Balkos section of Alexandria. When his father got transferred to Al-Katiba, he moved with him and started school there. When he entered secondary school, he moved to Cairo to live with his uncle who just got out of the British prison. He took part in an anti-British protest, which also resulted in why he had trouble with his school teachers, because they were also British. He got involved in political activism and got himself detained after joining a clash between protesters and the police. This played a huge role in his rise to power because he started getting involved at a really young age. And then when he finally became an adult, he attended law school for several months and then joined the military academy. He graduated as a second lieutenant and rose in power after that. He hated the British so much, he planned a secret revolutionary organization called the Free Officers. Oh, and whoa! Ding ding ding! Nasser received a blow on the forehead that left a lifelong scar. I just felt the need to mention that because Nasser was really interesting back then. Moving on. Okay, so our first artifact. Here we have a picture of Nasser and his friends. He met these friends in the military academy, and they all came together to form the Free Officers Organization. They were basically a group of military soldiers who were interested in revolution after witnessing the Abdeen Palace incident. Their motive was to end British control over Egypt. Nasser believed it wasn't fair that the British bombarded the king and threatened him if he were not to concede to British commands. Nasser led a coup on July 23, 1952, and forced King Farouk to leave his throne. This was his first step to rising in power. After taking over the country and Egypt becoming a republic, Muhammad Naguib's position slowly started to deteriorate. Mind you, Muhammad Naguib was the current prime minister at the time. His relationship with Nasser also started to deteriorate after several disagreements. In conclusion, Nasser put him under house arrest in 1954 and named himself prime minister. Moving on to the next artifact, we have the Aswan High Dam project. Tensions rose with Britain and France at the time. In the next slide, I included a few pictures of the Aswan High Dam today. Okay, so here we have a picture of Nasser looking at the dam. Okay, so basically the US and Britain had promised to aid about 270 million to finance the first stage of the dam. I know, right? Big deal. However, on July 20th, 1956, the US decided to say psych and canceled the offer, and Britain followed in their footsteps the day after. As a result of this unfortunate event, Nasser decided to take charge and hold a mass meeting in Alexandria to nationalize the Suez Canal Company. He declared to use its proceeds, the tolls Egypt would collect in about 5 years, to finance the dam. Britain and France weren't necessarily happy about this, so they decided to team up with Israel to attack Egypt, which then became known as the Suez Crisis. Nasser stationed the UN Emergency Force, also known as UNEF, in the Sinai Peninsula to prevent anything from happening between the Egyptian and Israeli forces. He dramatically rose in power right after, as he was elected the president in 1956. Under his control, Egypt was doing pretty well. There was an increase in industrialization. Land reforms broke up Egypt's large private estates. A campaign was conducted against corruption, and women earned more rights, including the right to vote. Moving on to the next artifact, we have Gamal Abdel Nasser's American Economic Aid speech. I will play a snippet of his speech, and there are subtitles, so you guys can go ahead and read it if you'd like.
في شؤون ولكن إذا كانوا الأمريكان بيفهمون.
So basically in this speech, he is strong about keeping Egypt pretty much independent from the United States. Nasser believes that receiving aid from the US is basically putting Egypt under their control, resulting in them losing their independence. We can recall back to the time when they originally agreed to help aid Egypt in building their dam, but canceled the offer a few days later along with Britain. So after that, we gain insight on why Nasser doesn't want help from the United States. He can't trust anyone anymore. It's every man for himself. Nasser also jokes about their tea and meat and tells the people that they can lessen the amount of intake. In this speech, he was eloquent and determined with his thoughts and goals, and this was definitely something his people liked about him. He was convincing, and everyone agreed with whatever he had to say. This played a huge role in his rise to power. For the next artifact, we have Nasser making a speech on his meeting with the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. So I couldn't help but notice how Nasser made a fool out of the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. He says, "Sir, you have a daughter in the College of Medicine. She's not wearing a tarha." He mentions how the head wanted to implement a rule where women should be forced to wear tarhas. Tarhas are scarves, and in the video you can see a person yelling out, "He should wear the tarha!" or something along those lines. And to they basically said that to basically make fun of how dumb the head of the Muslim Brotherhood sounds. And Nasser made the head of the Muslim Brotherhood sound like a huge hypocrite. And I find this crazy because back then, when he was still prime minister, the Muslim Brotherhood attempted to assassinate Nasser. However, their operation obviously failed, and he ended up killing a lot of their people. So what is the Muslim Brotherhood exactly? Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is an Islamic organization. The purpose of this speech was to point out the flaws of the head of the Muslim Brotherhood. In the end, the crowd agrees with him, and they all laugh. Moving on to the next artifact, we have another speech. Yay! That was made on July 26, 1956. In this speech, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. I'm going to play a snippet of his speech again, and subtitles are available.
وما عليها من التزامات واللجان القائمة حاليا على إدارتها.
In this speech, he tells everyone that we should all forget about what had happened in the past. You know, leave the past in the past. And we can recall back to the time when the West decided to not help them finance the canal. Egypt becomes independent, and near the end, everyone starts cheering because they are now in charge and no one can stop them. Nasser always moves forward, and this was the trait that kept people supporting him. He had a passionate and strong voice that was so intriguing that everyone listened to him. Here we have the sixth artifact, the Suez Crisis Speech. This is completely different compared to the Suez Canal speech.
مركب هنا يهزوا الحكومة. النهارده ما يشتمونا نقدر نضربهم بالجزمة كمان ونشتمهم من أكبر واحد لأقل واحد.
Unfortunately, as a result of all this fighting, around 130,000 Egyptians lost their lives. In this speech, he mentions how strong they are as a country. Nasser believes that Britain is a fool. He keeps talking about how Britain would insult them so much, how they would pay so much money for weapons and everything, and how they would deploy so many troops and lose. He basically made fun of them and called out their flaws. As a president, it is obvious that They will never talk down on their own country. They will do whatever they can to make fun of their enemies. That's just how it works. For the next artifact, I was able to find a newspaper that was published during the war. On the newspaper, it says, Nasser, the canal stays blocked. And underneath it, it says, as long as a single foreign soldier is on our soil. In summation, Nasser is trying to say that as long as the enemy is still attacking us, we fight back. The newspaper also says, we won't be taken by surprise again. This signifies that Egypt used to be talked down on. Nasser wants the whole world to know that they are strong and that they should never be underestimated. Through this newspaper, we can definitely tell that Egypt holds a lot of hatred towards Britain. Their hatred for them acts as motivation to move forward. This is relevant to Nasser's rise to power because he sounds powerful. His voice acts as reassurance for the people of Egypt. The people of Egypt think that they're safe under his protection. And for our last artifact, I have one more speech that addresses the post-war defeat. This is a speech that Nasser made after the Six-Day War.
لقد تعودنا معا في أوقات النصر وفي أوقات المحن.
So in this speech, he speaks in a sad but soft tone because they had just lost the war. He looks back on their efforts and people sympathize with him. In the war, Egyptian troops proceeded to close the Gulf to Israeli shipping, and Israel already told them that blockading the Gulf would only lead to war, and it did. On June 5th, 1967, Israel launched an attack on Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, which is also referred to as the Six-Day War or June War. All of Egypt's airfields were struck, and most Egyptian planes were demolished. Egyptian forces were defeated, and the Israelis reached the Suez Canal on June 8th. This was a victory for Israel, and Egypt was devastated with the loss. This is relevant to Nasser's rise to power because he felt humiliated and wanted to resign. However, a lot of people loved him, and he had a lot of support. Due to all the support he had along with the government, he remained in office. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Here are my sources, and I hope you guys learned a thing or two today about the one and only Gamal Abdel Nasser. Thank you for listening.